There is a town that should not exist, a town that is half forgotten, half erased, and fully cursed. The name is Ashvale. It does not appear on most maps anymore. And if you ask the old people in the neighboring valleys about it, some will look away, some will mutter a prayer, and some will tell you not to speak the name at all. For Ashvale is a place that burns. It has burned for more than 100 years, not with the ordinary flames of hearths or lanterns, not with the kind of fire you can douse with water or smother with sand. No, the burning of Ashvale comes from beneath, from the earth itself. The coal seams that snake under the hills caught fire long ago, and they have never gone out. Even now the ground exhales smoke. Stand still long enough, and you will hear it, a hiss, faint and steady, like something alive, like the mountains themselves are breathing. And if you listen long enough, you will realize that the breathing is not empty. It whispers. I went to Ashvale only once in my life, and even now, I wonder if I ever truly left it behind, because sometimes when I stand by a fire, I hear them, the voices. I hear them in the crackle of logs, in the hiss of smoke, and they say the same thing over and over. Give us ash, give us breath, feed the fire. That was Ashvale's curse. Long before the fires, long before Ashvale had its name, settlers carved their lives into these mountains. Winters were cruel, brutal. Snow fell so deep it swallowed cabins whole. Rivers froze until they cracked like glass. The people starved. Their fires dwindled. And then the flames came alive, not in the way of flame flickers or bends. No, these flames had shape. They shimmered in the hearth, in the campfires, even in the miners' lanterns. At first, the people thought it was their imagination, but then the shapes opened eyes that glowed like embers, eyes that watched, and then they spoke. The settlers called them Salamanders, not lizards, not animals, but fire-given thought, fire-given hunger. The Salamanders offered warmth, enough to survive the winter, enough to keep the people alive. But fire never gives without taking. The settlers asked, "What must we give in return?" And the Salamanders answered, "Ash, ash and blood, ash and breath." The people made a pact. They gave offerings to the fire. And the Salamanders kept the flames burning bright. They survived the winter. They survived many winters. But greed makes men forgetful, and fear makes them careless. The pact was broken. 100 years later, Ashvale still burned. But now, the burning was not mercy. It was vengeance. I remember the first time I went down into the mines. The air was hot, too hot, not the kind of heat that comes from the swing of a pickaxe or the breath of men working. This was oven heat, suffocating, heavy, the kind of heat that makes your lungs ache when you breathe it, and beneath it the sound. At first, I thought it was the hiss of gas, the groan of rock, but then I realized the hiss had rhythm. It rose and fell like words. One of the men, his name was Carter, went ahead with his lamp. He laughed at us, said, "Hell, maybe the fire's been waiting for us." And then he screamed. We ran toward the sound, but what we found was not fire. His lantern lay shattered. The ground around it was black, scorched, but there were no flames. Only soot, and in the soot, footprints. They were too long, too narrow. The toes were pointed, clawed. They sank into the earth like something heavy had walked there. But they did not belong to Carter. They trailed off into the dark, and Carter was gone. Only the smell of burnt flesh lingered in the air. That night, the town gathered at the church, not to pray, but to remember. The pastor opened a book, not the Bible, an older book. The leather was cracked, the pages black with soot. He read to us the truth, that the Salamanders had been here before, that the fires were not accidents, not natural disasters, that they had been lit by hands not human. He warned us, do not disturb the deep tunnels, do not listen to the whispers, and above all, do not follow the footsteps in the ash. But warnings mean little to men with hunger in their eyes. The mine promised wealth, the fire promised warmth, and so they dug deeper. The whispers grew louder. They came not just from the mine, but from chimneys, from ovens, from cracks in the earth. The air itself seemed to mutter. Children woke at night, saying they heard someone calling them. They pointed to the smoke rising from the ground and said, "There's someone in the fire." And then came the dreams. The whole town dreamed together. The same vision, forest ablaze, figures walking through flame untouched, their skin cracked like stone, glowing veins burning beneath, their eyes, embers alive, watching. In every dream, the figures whispered, "The pact is broken. You owe us ash." Ashvale had become an offering, a sacrifice waiting to be claimed. And though most people pretended not to see, not to hear in the silence of night, every soul in town knew the same truth. The Salamanders were waking. There is a story buried beneath Ashvale's smoke, a story older than the town, older than the mines, older even than the settlers who came to carve homes into mountains. It is a story of hunger and of fire. The old journals call it the Pact of Cinders. Few dared to write of it. Most who did were burned, their homes consumed in mysterious fires, their bodies left blackened husks in the street. But a handful of records remain, pages charred at the edges, ink smeared with soot, words half erased by smoke. And all of them say the same thing. Ashvale was built on a bargain. The settlers who first came here were desperate. They had traveled far into mountains, seeking land rich with coal and wood. The land was plentiful, but the winters were merciless. Snow fell without stopping, blanketing cabins until doors froze shut. Food dwindled. Fires died. Children froze in their sleep. Men buried their families beneath the snow until their shovels broke. And when they were nearly broken themselves, the fire answered. It began in the hearths. Flames that bent strangely, flames that seemed to twist into shapes. Faces, glowing faintly in the wood smoke. Faces that opened eyes, eyes like burning coals, staring from the shadows. The settlers were terrified. Some fled, some prayed. But hunger makes cowards brave, and desperation makes men listen. The flame spoke, not with words of men, but with hissing, crackling voices that rose and fell with the fire. And this is what they said: "We are the Salamanders, born of fire, fed by ash. Give us what we ask, and you will live. Deny us, and you will burn." The people begged to know what they must give. The flames flickered, and the Salamanders answered, "Ash and blood." They would be fed each year, offerings of burnt wood, burnt flesh, and burnt life. In return, the Salamanders would never let the fires die. The mines would stay warm, the winter survivable. The people would live. It was a terrible bargain. But what choice did they have? And so the first sacrifice was made. An infant, some say, a lamb, others insist. But the oldest journal of all tells the truth. It was not one life. It was 13. 13 bodies given to fire. Men, women, children. Their names struck from records. Their graves filled not with earth, but with cinders. The Salamanders took them, and in return the flames rose higher. The snow melted around the town. The settlers survived the winter, and so the pact was sealed. For generations, Ashvale lived by that bargain. Every year, the fire was fed. Some say the offerings were criminals. Others say they were chosen by lot. The journals grow vague, deliberately so, as though the writers feared the truth. But one thing is clear. As long as the Salamanders were fed, Ashvale thrived. The mines were rich. The soil was fertile. The winters were bearable. And for a time, the people forgot that they lived on borrowed fire. But bargains with spirits are like embers. They burn low, they flare, and eventually they consume everything. The offerings grew fewer. The people grew proud. They told themselves the pact was superstition, a relic of the ignorant past. They refused to give blood. They refused to give ash. And that is when the burning began. The mines caught fire first, entire shafts collapsing as flames roared up from the deep. Homes blackened without warning. Families found ashen in their beds with no sign of a blaze. The fire spread beneath the ground, unstoppable, unquenchable, and with it came the whispers. The pact is broken. You owe us ash. The journals end abruptly after that. Pages blackened, words smeared, some books burned halfway through, as if the fire reached up and silenced the hand that wrote them. But there is one entry, barely legible, written in trembling ink. They are not fire. They are what fire hides. They walk where the flames cannot be seen. They were the skin of the dead, and they are waiting for the debt to be paid. The pact of cinders was no myth. It was a contract, a curse carved into the very veins of the earth. And as long as Ashvale burned, the Salamanders would come to collect. I remember the night I read those words. The church was dark. Only a single candle lit the page. Outside, smoke drifted across the windows, as though the fire itself was listening. And in the silence, I swear I heard it, a hiss, low and steady, curling up from the candle flame. The Salamanders were whispering. They were whispering my name. Ashvale is not silent anymore. The town breathes. At night, the smoke moves like a living thing, curling between the houses, slipping under doors, seeping into lungs. It leaves a taste like burnt copper on the tongue, and whispers low and thin, just at the edge of hearing. At first, the townsfolk dismissed it as imagination. Wind in the chimneys, the crackle of firewood, the sigh of smoke through trees. But then the voices grew clearer. They began to speak names. Children were the first to notice. They woke screaming in the night, crying that the fire in the hearth was calling to them. Some said it sounded like their mother's voice. Others swore it was their father's, though their fathers were asleep in the next room. One boy, Samuel Griggs, told his parents the fire whispered, "Come outside, just for a moment. Come play in the ash." The next morning, Samuel was gone. All that remained were footprints in the snow, leading to the edge of the forest, where they stopped, burned into the ice, black and smoldering. Then came the knocking, 3 sharp raps on the windows at night. But when shutters opened, there was no one there, only a faint glow, like embers dying in the snow. Some swore they saw hands press against the glass. Blackened hands, blistered skin, skin that flaked like ash when the morning sun rose. The townsfolk grew restless. The church filled with frightened prayers. The pastor insisted it was a devil, nothing more. But an old woman, Sarah Dole, whispered the truth. It's the Salamanders. The pact is broken, and now they come collect. She was laughed at. She was called mad. But 3 nights later, her house burned to the ground. The fire brigade claimed her lamp had overturned. But those who saw it swore the flames didn't spread outward. They spread inward, folding toward her body as if the fire itself was feeding. When her remains were found, her mouth was filled with ash. And then the voices grew bolder, no longer whispers. They came from every flame in town. Hearth fires, torches, lanterns. Even candles flicker with tongues of sound, crackling words that chilled the blood. Ash must be paid. 13 were given. 13 are due. The fire remembers. Men douse their lanterns, but the voices did not stop. The fire inside them still burned. One miner vomited black soot until his lungs collapsed. Another clawed at his chest, screaming that something inside was burning him alive. When he was cut open, his veins glowed faintly, as though filled with embers. The terror spread. Families fled, abandoning homes, leaving hearts smoldering. But those who left did not escape. Travelers told of wagons found overturned in the snow, horses burnt where they stood, flesh turned to coal though no fire touched them, and in the ash nearby, tracks, not human, not animal, but long, dragging shapes, as though bodies made of smoke and cinder had pulled themselves along the earth. I remember the night it reached my own door. The fire in my cabin went out without warning. The smoke rose straight upward, then bent sharply toward me, and in that smoke I heard them. Not one voice, but many, hundreds, layered over each other. Men, women, children, all whispering the same word, over and over. Dead, dead, dead. The walls rattled, the glass trembled, and in the faint glow of dying embers, I saw them. Faces, not carved from flame, not imagined in smoke. Real faces, black and blistered, their eyes like burning coals, staring at me from the ash. And one of them was Sarah Dole. Her charred lips moved, and though no sound came, I knew what she was saying. You will burn too. That was the night I stopped sleeping with fire. But it made no difference, because in Ashvale, the flames no longer waited to be lit. They were already here, waiting, watching. And every time I close my eyes, I swear I hear them, closer. It began with the children, always the children. Ashvale's youngest started to change. Not all at once, not suddenly, but slowly, in ways that made parents whisper in terror. Their eyes no longer shone with innocence. In the candlelight, their pupils glowed faintly, as if tiny embers smoldered behind them. Some coughed, and ash spilled from their mouths. Others scratched at their skin until it flaked like burnt paper. A few, when left unattended, were found staring into the hearth for hours, whispering back to the flames, as though answering a voice no one else could hear. The townsfolk called it a fever. The doctor said it was smoke sickness. But the mothers knew better. Their children were being claimed. One night, the first disappearance came. Little Margaret Hale was tucked into bed, her blanket pulled high, her father reading her prayers. But when morning came, the bed was empty. The window was unbroken. The floor was untouched. The only trace of her was a pile of ash upon the pillow, still warm. It did not stop there. Each night, another was taken. Each day, another child stared longer into the fire. Then they began to return. But they did not return as they were. The first was Samuel Griggs, the boy who had vanished weeks ago. He was found wandering the edge of the forest at dusk, barefoot in the snow, his skin blackened as though he had walked through fire. Yet he did not bleed. He did not shiver. He did not speak. When his mother ran to embrace him, he did not move. He only lifted his head, his eyes, two glowing coals, sinking deep into the sockets. When he finally opened his mouth, the sound that came was not human. It was a hiss of smoke, the roar of flame. 13. The fire must feed. His mother's screams were heard across the valley. By the time the men arrived, there was nothing left of her but charred bone, and a blackened shadow burned into the snow. Samuel was gone again. Others came. Children long thought dead wandered the streets at night, their shapes flickering, their bodies wavering like heat rising off stone. Some were faceless. Some had mouths full of glowing cinders, and some bore no features at all, only smooth, blackened masks where faces should be. The townsfolk named them the Ash Children. Fear consumed Ashvale. Doors were bolted. Fires were smothered. Candles blown out. But the darkness gave no protection. For the Ash Children did not need flame to come. They were flame. They stood at windows, watching. They knocked on doors with blackened hands, leaving scorched prints on the wood. Some claimed they crawled beneath the floors, dragging themselves on ember-streaked limbs, whispering through the cracks. We remember the pact. We remember the blood. The pastor called for a gathering in the church. He demanded all who feared the fire to come pray. And so the townsfolk gathered, men, women, trembling children, clutching Bibles, singing hymns with cracked voices. But midway through the sermon, the candles flickered. The pastor raised his voice, insisting God would protect them. The flames bent sideways. One by one, the candles blew out. Darkness consumed the church. The air grew heavy with the smell of smoke. And from the blackness came the sound of children laughing. Not joyous, not playful, but hollow, dry, the hiss of smoke through a dying fire. When the torches were relit, the pews in the back were empty. 6 families were gone. Their coats, their shoes, their belongings, all left behind. Only the pews remained, and on the wood, charred handprints, tiny, blackened, child-sized. That night, the whispers grew louder, not in the fires, but in the bones of every man and woman in Ashvale. The children were not the only ones marked, and the Salamanders were not done taking what was owed. The church bells no longer rang. The ropes had been burned through, the bronze warped and blackened. The bells lay cracked on the frozen ground, their mouths filled with soot. No one dared touch them. The town of Ashvale had fallen into a silence that was deeper than death, a silence that listened. For the fire was always listening. The elders gathered in secret. They met in the cellar beneath the mayor's house, candles sputtering in the damp air. Their faces were drawn, hollowed by weeks of terror. Some had lost children. Others had lost their sanity. But all shared the same fear. The Salamanders had returned because the pact was broken. It was old Hiram Blackwood, the miner, who spoke what no one else dared. They want payment. Always did. 13 were given in the old days. 13 to keep them in their fires, to keep them from walking among us. The room fell silent. We stopped paying, he whispered, his voice cracking like old timber. We thought the bargain was only superstition. But we were wrong. Now they've come to collect. And if we don't pay, all of Ashvale will burn. The mayor slammed his fist on the table, his face pale with rage and fear. You would have us sacrifice our children? Old Hiram did not flinch. Better 13 than all. The cellar erupted. Voices shouted. Prayers were muttered. Curses thrown. Some insisted the pact was blasphemy, the work of demons. Others hissed that demons or not, the fire did not lie, and the fire would consume them all if it was not fed. And then, from the corner, a woman's voice cut through the chaos. It was Margaret Griggs, mother of Samuel, the boy who had returned as something no longer human. Her eyes were hollow, her cheeks sunken, and ash clung to her dress as though it followed her. They already have our children, she whispered. What more will it matter if we give them 13 more? Better chosen than stolen. The air grew heavy. The candles flickered low. And for a moment, every flame leaned inward, as if listening, approving. The pact had been rekindled. That night, a list was drawn. 13 names. Not the young this time, but the desperate, the weak, the expendable, the sick, the old, the ones no one would miss. The town decided to choose instead of waiting for the fire to take. The chosen were dragged to the old mine on the edge of Ashvale, where the first salamanders were said to have risen from the earth. The wind cut sharp. The snow burned like knives, but the ground near the mine was strangely warm. The mayor carried the torch. His hands shook, the flame sputtering, but he forced himself forward. Behind him, the 13 knelt in the snow, bound and weeping, their voices carrying desperate prayers to God who had stopped listening. Old Hiram chanted in the old tongue, words passed down from his grandfather, who had whispered them in the mines, words that did not belong to man, words that burned in the throat when spoken. When the torch was lowered into the pit, the fire did not rise from the wood. It rose from the ground. A great plume of flame burst upward, but it was not natural fire. It burned black and red, its edges writhing like serpents, its smoke filled with faces. The salamanders had come. The ground split with a hiss like steam, and shapes slithered upward, forms of molten shadow, crawling and writhing. They had no faces, only burning hollows where eyes should be. The chosen screamed as the flames closed around them, but their screams were short. The fire consumed flesh faster than any pyre. When it ended, nothing remained. No bones, no ash, nothing but silence. The elders turned to leave, believing the pact was satisfied. But before the fire died, a voice spoke, not in whispers, not in crackling echoes, but in words every man and woman understood, rolling like thunder from the pit. 13 for 13. But the debt is greater now. The fire is hungry. The fire will take more. The ground sealed. The flames sank back into the dark. And Ashvale knew the truth. The pact could not be restored. The salamanders were no longer bargaining. They were feasting. The pact was broken. The bargain was ash. And the fire was no longer patient. It came in waves. At first, the townsfolk thought they might endure, that perhaps the 13 taken would be enough to slow the hunger. But within days, the fires returned, not to whisper, not to warn, but to devour. Entire homes went up in flames without cause, not from sparks, not from accidents. The walls would simply ignite, swallowing family after family as they screamed inside. When the flames died, the houses stood untouched. The wood was whole, the roof unbroken, as if no fire had touched them. But inside, the rooms were empty. Not even bones remained. Only the scent of burned flesh lingered. The streets filled with screams. Men ran through the night, clutching their children, only to have the little ones torn from their arms by hands of fire that rose from the snow. The children vanished into smoke, their cries cut short. The women who fled into the forest were found days later, standing in a circle of scorched earth. Their eyes were burned out, their mouths filled with ash. Their bodies did not rot. They stood there, stiff and blackened, as if waiting. The town called it the burning season. Ashvale fell into madness. Neighbors turned on each other, accusing families of breaking the pact, of angering the fire. Some homes were set alight deliberately, in a vain attempt to appease the Salamanders, but the flames did not discriminate. The mayor was found hanged in the square, his body blackened, swinging from a rope of braided smoke that burned but never consumed. His mouth was open in a silent scream, and his tongue had been replaced with a coal that glowed through the night. Then came the walking fires. Shapes began to crawl from the old mine, drifting through the streets. At first they were formless, pillars of smoke, walking embers, glowing silhouettes. But as nights passed, they grew clearer. They wore the faces of the dead. Children returned to their homes, their blackened hands scratching at the windows, their coal-bright eyes peering in at their parents. Wives returned to husbands, whispering their names in voices made of crackling flame. Those who opened the door were never seen again. The ash children multiplied. They marched through the streets, dozens at a time, singing in voices that burned the ears. Their song was not in any language, yet everyone who heard it understood. We are the fire. We are the ash. The debt is never paid. The ground itself turned against the town. Snow melted into black slush, boiling in places though no heat touched it. Trees caught fire without burning, their branches weeping molten sap that hissed like screams. The river turned dark, glowing faintly beneath its surface, as though embers bled into the water. Fish floated belly up, their scales charred from within. The animals fled, but the people could not. One by one, houses stood empty, not abandoned, emptied. Doors left open, meals half-eaten, clothes still warm. But the people were gone, as if plucked from the earth by unseen hands. And in the hearth of every home, a single ember glowed, always the same, always waiting. The last of the townsfolk huddled in the square, too terrified to scatter. They prayed in silence, eyes darting to the shadows, waiting for the next horror. And then the bells, the cracked bells long dead, began to ring, not from hands, not from ropes, but from the fire itself. The sound was deep, booming, endless, rolling to the valley like thunder. And with every toll, more of the salamanders came, crawling, slithering, walking out of the smoke. Children with hollow eyes, men with skin of coal, women whose hair streamed like fire. They filled the square, surrounding the survivors. And when the last bell rang, the fire spoke with one voice. Ashvale is ours. The survivors did not scream. They did not run. For when the salamanders moved closer, they saw the truth. They were not being killed. They were being claimed. Their bodies burned, their souls pulled into fire, their faces joined the endless host of the ash children. The burning season had ended, and there was no one left to see its end. Ashvale is gone. The town that once rang with laughter, with the clang of hammers and the toll of bells, is now nothing but silence. The wind moves through the empty streets, but it carries no sound, only the stench of smoke. The houses still stand. The church still towers, but they're hollow shells. The windows gape like blind eyes, the doors hang open, and every wall is scorched though no flame touches them now. It is as if the fire lingers not in wood or stone, but in the air itself. Travelers whisper of it. A valley that no map records, a village that appears only at dusk. Some say it is always winter there, the snow black with soot, the sky stained a permanent gray. Others swear they heard bells tolling when no tower stood. And those who wander into the ruins do not always wander out. A group of miners once came, Long after Ashvale was forgotten, they sought the old veins of coal, the black wealth hidden in the mountains. They laughed at the stories of salamanders, mocked the warnings of nearby villagers. But when they dug into the earth, they found no coal. They found ash, ash that burned without flame. It hissed and whispered when touched. It clung to their skin, burrowed under their nails, filled their lungs until they coughed black. Some swore they heard voices, children's voices, singing in the darkness of mine. The miners fled, but only half returned. The rest were never seen again. Those who survived carried a curse. Their skin blistered and cracked as though burned. At night, their eyes glowed faintly. One by one, they set fire to their own homes, whispering, "Ashvale is ours." The ground itself rejects life. Crops will not grow. Cattle die when they graze too close. The soil feels warm to the touch, even beneath winter frost. And when it rains, the water runs black, leaving streaks of soot across the land. The people of nearby villages call it the Scorched Hollow. They do not speak its true name. They say the earth remembers, that the dead of Ashvale still lingers, that the Salamanders do not rest. There are those who swear they've seen the town alive. A traveler described walking through Ashvale at twilight and hearing voices. Families at dinner, children playing in the square, bells ringing from the tower. For a moment, he thought the tales were lies. But then the air grew heavy with smoke. The voices warped into screams. And the faces in the windows were not human. When he stumbled out of the hollow, his hair was white, his eyes clouded with ash. He did not speak again. The church still stands. Its doors are always open, its pews untouched. But if one dares to enter, the air is thick with soot. The altar is covered in a black film that no hand can wipe away. And if you kneel there, if you pray, the candles light themselves. Their flames burn cold. And in the shadows of the church, you will hear the voices of children laughing. Ashvale was not destroyed. It was claimed. The Salamanders do not merely take lives. They take place, land, stone, memory. And so Ashvale stands forever, a wound that never heals, a fire that never dies. The blackened earth waits, and it hungers still. The story said that Ashvale was abandoned, but abandonment implies silence, emptiness. Ashvale is not empty. The first were farmers. Driven by hunger, they sought to reclaim the blackened soil. They said the land was poisoned. Yes, but fire cleanses. With hard work, perhaps crops could be coaxed from the earth. For a time it seemed possible. The seed sprouted. The fields turned green. But when the wind blew from the hollow, the stalks withered to gray. And then the children came. No one knew where they came from. Small figures wandering at the edge of the fields, their faces pale, their eyes dark, their hair matted with soot. They did not speak. They only watched. At night, the farmers heard their laughter drifting across the fields. It was not joyful. It was hollow. One farmer claimed he saw his own daughter among them, but his daughter had died in the fire years before. When he ran toward her, she smiled, opened her mouth, and a stream of black ash poured out. He was never seen again. The ash children did not need to break doors or shatter windows. They only stood outside at dusk, staring in until the families inside could bear it no longer. Some opened their doors willingly, believing their lost children had returned. Others hid and prayed, listening to the sound of small hands scratching at the walls. Those who resisted found ash inside their homes anyway. It seeped in through cracks, coated their beds, filled their lungs as they slept. They awoke coughing black dust, and in their dreams the children whispered, "Play with us." The farmers fled in terror, But they did not all escape. Villagers speak of a family who vanished overnight, their house still standing, their tools laid neatly by the door. The fields they had planted had turned to ash. Every stalk of wheat, every leaf, every root, burned to dust though no flame touched them. And in the empty house, there were footprints, small footprints, leading from room to room, made of ash. Travelers who pass by Ashvale today say they see them still, the ash children. Sometimes they follow from a distance, silent as smoke. Sometimes they giggle from the tree-lean. Sometimes they sing, though no tongue can repeat the words. And if you meet their eyes for too long, your vision will blur. The world will dim, and when it clears, you will no longer see the children. You will see flames. The burning of Ashvale, over and over again, until you scream yourself hoarse. They say the Salamanders were born of flame and blood. But the children are worse. They do not kill, not at first. They lure, they mock, they become. And once they have chosen you, once you've looked upon their hollow eyes, your fate is sealed. For the ash children are not the victims. They are not the dead. They're the fire given shape, and the fire always returns. Ashvale was never meant to survive. Every path, every whisper, every ember led here to the end. And in the end, the Salamanders awoke. It began with the bells, not church bells, not iron or bronze. The ringing came from the earth itself, a deep, guttural toll, as if the bones of the world were striking against one another. With each toll, the air grew hotter, the ground quaked, and from the ruins of Ashvale's hollow, smoke bled upward like a wound reopening. The farmers who remained fled. The travelers turned back. The animals ran wild into the forests. But it was already too late. The ash children were the first to change. They stopped laughing. They stopped scratching. They simply stood still, gazing skyward, as the black dust on their skin began to smolder. Their eyes glowed like coals. Their small forms cracked and split, revealing not flesh but flame. They were not children at all. They never were. They were fragments, embers of the Salamanders themselves, given shape to wander and torment. And now, with the tolling of the last bell, they returned to the fire. The ground split, and from beneath the charred soil, the Salamanders rose. No longer creatures of myth, no longer whispered terrors. They crawled forth as living pyres, figures of burning ash and bone, skin peeling into embers, their jaws wide and dripping smoke. Their voices were a chorus of flame. We return. The village collapsed in hours. The trees ignited without touch. The streams hissed and boiled. The homes, long abandoned, erupted in pillars of fire. There was no one to hear the screams, except those who carried the curse. The last few who dared to enter Ashvale spoke of visions, flames devouring their own shadows, walls of ash closing in, suffocating them. And behind it all, the Salamanders whispering, promising that no fire ever truly dies. One by one, those who heard vanished. Some left only charred outlines where their bodies had stood. Others were never found at all. Ashvale is gone now, erased from maps, left to smolder in silence. But the Salamanders do not need a village. They do not need ruins. They need only memory. And so the curse spreads. They say if you dream of fire for 9 nights in a row, the Salamanders have chosen you. They say if you find ash upon your pillow though no fire burns, you've already been marked. And if you hear the tolling of the earth bells in the dead of night, it is already too late. The Salamanders are not bound to Ashvale. They are not bound to earth, or wood, or stone. They are bound to you. For once they have touched you, once they have found you, the fire follows. And fire never forgets. So beware the ashes, beware the whispers, beware the children with soot in their eyes. For the salamanders are patient. They wait, they burn, and when the world grows dark, they will rise again,